It is now my absolute pleasure and delight to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Ezra Levant. Rare is the opportunity to introduce someone with the complex notoriety of today's speaker. To be completely frank, it's hard not to be intimidated at the task ahead of me. While no single word or phrase can possibly describe our speaker today, I will offer this single sentence. Ezra Levant is a lightning rod for opinion, both his and those of others. Our speaker, Ezra, is a lawyer, writer, political activist, and media personality. He's the founder and former publisher of the Western Standard, hosts The Source Daily on Sun News Network, and has written several books on politics. His most recent book is Ethical Oil: The Case of Canada's Oil Sands. Born in Calgary, Ezra holds a commerce degree from the University of Calgary and a law degree from the University of Alberta. Over his career, he's taken on the Canada Pension Plan, trade unions, the minimum wage, universal health care, and subsidized tuition. If Ezra were a hockey player, you'd probably describe him as leaning right while shooting at the left. He's as dedicated to free speech, human rights, and the cause of conservatism. His commitment and ability to sow a vision made him prime mover in what we've come to know now as Unite the Right movement. He gave it the energy that fostered the merger of the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada into the party that now governs our country. The National Post declared that his book, Shakedown, was the most important public affairs book of the year. His current book, Ethical Oil, and his premise that the real test of ethical oil was not in comparing the oil sands to some impossible ideal standard, but comparing to its real competitors. It has shaken government, public and media opinion, not only across North America, but around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Ezra Levant.
Thank you very much, Verity. And when you said no one word sums up Ezra Levant, I am very grateful that people didn't shout out your suggestions for what that word might be. It's a pleasure to speak at the Empire Club. I'm a simple boy from the colonies, way out west in Alberta, where frankly a chicken lunch would have been the vegetarian option. So it's nice to be here in the heart of the Empire at the Royal York. I'm sure it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Bennett Jones, so many of you here today. It's because of you that, frankly, I'm not in jail right now. So let's be honest, and we'll deal with the parole officers later. Folks, it's great to be here. I am limited in time because I got to go and tape my show at 2, so you are very lucky. This will not be the 2-hour speech that it normally is. I want to tell you about Ethical Oil. It's a book that I wrote by accident. I know that sounds funny, how to write a book by accident. Well, it's the truth. A couple years ago, I had written a book, and my friend Jonathan Kay helped me out, called Shakedown, and it was about freedom of speech and human rights and that sort of thing, and I was at the Ottawa Writers' Festival talking about it. And I was there a little bit early, and they said, look, there's some guy downstairs talking about the oil sands. Why don't you go downstairs and make it a panel discussion? I said, well, I really don't know anything about the oil sands. They said, you're from Alberta. You're an expert. Go. And I didn't want to be rude. I mean, they were very generous to me. So I went downstairs, and it was a room not much bigger than this. And all the walls were adorned with what I call oil sands pornography, these poster-sized pictures. Here's an example. This is from the Greenpeace website. That's oil sands porn. It's designed to get an emotional reaction. And I just made a joke. I said, oh, there's my apartment right there. And, I tried my best. But basically, let's be honest, I made everyone in that room angrier at the oil sands by the time when they were done. I mean, it's not that the people in that room were malicious or hostile. They weren't professional fundraisers from Greenpeace or anything. In fact, if I really thought to myself, the average person in that room The characteristic in their heart most was they were a do-gooder. They were maybe a little utopian, but they were idealists. I'd say the average person in that room, 20-something university student from McGill, never been west of Hamilton maybe, taking vegetarian studies. Oh, you know who I'm talking about. Let's call her Zoe. There's a picture of me, by the way. There's a picture of me, an artist rendition of me being chased out of there. It didn't go very well, but that's Zoe. Zoe didn't like what I had to say. And what was wrong? I mean, I think I'm a persuasive fella, but the people in that room, I hated it. And I thought, in one of the rare moments of self-reflection in my life, I thought, what did I do wrong? And I thought, the problem is I'm a right-wing guy, and everything I said, I'm a skeptic of the theory of man-made global warming. I like profits. I'm a capitalist. Everything I was saying was just needling, and making people angrier. And I thought, hang on a second, what if I threw out my vocabulary, my words, and I tried again? What if I'm a right-wing guy? What if I tried to write a left-wing book? Can a right-wing guy write a left-wing book? Well, I don't know. Every guy in this room spends half our time thinking, what do women want? So if a guy can think, what do women want? Maybe a right-wing conservative from Alberta can say, well, what does Zoe want? What does Zoe care about? And if you ask her, she'll say, I care about the environment. I care about there's St. Suzuki looking up into heaven. I'll be with you, my fellow angels. I'll be there soon. I'm coming. Okay, so there's David Suzuki. He believes in, Zoe would say she believes in clean air, clean water, and clean soil. And in the last 10 years, Zoe has been taught to be totally terrified of greenhouse gases. I am emitting some greenhouse gases right now, carbon dioxide. There are some people in the room emitting methane. I will not point you out. But this is the first thing that Zoe cares about, environmental responsibility. But if you look at the word Greenpeace, the first part is the green, but there's the peace part. Zoe cares about peace, if you ask her. And that's not all. Zoe cares about the plight of the working man. Now, Zoe has only worked in Starbucks as a barista, but she still sympathizes totally with the working man. And I'm not making this up. I mean, a large part of the progressive movement in Canada is labor unions. I mean, they certainly helped elect the new premier here. But that is not all what Zoe cares about. I mean, I care about right-wing stuff, but Zoe cares about environmental responsibility, peace, the treatment of workers, and probably the most important thing, Zoe, it's so important, it's so fundamental, she probably doesn't think of it unless she's prompted. It's human rights. We take it for granted in Canada. We have a woman as the Supreme Court Chief Justice. We've had the last 2 governors general in a row, women, immigrant women, actually. We take it for granted that women and men and all races are equal. It's so normal in Canada, we don't think about it, but if you were to prompt Zoe, she said, yes, that's very important to me. So these 4 values, environmental responsibility, peace, the treatment of workers, and human rights, that is how Zoe talks. These are Zoe's progressive values. This is not how I talk. I mean, I actually agree with these things. I might put them in a slightly different order, and I would use a different lingo. I wouldn't say treatment of workers or economic justice. I'd say, freedom of association, the right to unionize, things like that. These are the 4 values that Zoe has. And the problem in that room that day in Ottawa when I lost the debate was that so many people in that room who were good faith liberals, who were trying to make the world a better place, were comparing the oil sands against some fantasy fuel of the future that's perfect in every way. It hasn't been invented yet. I mean, the lithium crystals, that's totally awesome. We should totally get off oil and use the lithium crystals. Hey, great idea. Let me know when it happens. You actually probably won't have to let me know. I think I'll hear about it. Or what was the movie in Avatar? They were mining unobtainium, which is a pretty good name for it because it hasn't been invented yet. If you're going to debate oil sands oil versus the fantasy fuel of the future, I have to tell you right now, you are going to lose every time. But that is not a morally serious discussion. Zoe, who really wants to heal the world, the practical application of ethics is dealing with real choices in real life. And the thing is, if you do not fill up your car today with gas from the oil sands, you are going to be filling it up with gas from somewhere else. And forget about Canada. We're fueling 300 million Americans down there, and I can tell you right now where they're going to get their oil from, if not from the oil sands, because I know where they got it from before the oil sands came along. If we were talking about olive oil, fine, buy it from whoever you want, Greece, Italy, good folks, knock yourself out. But the thing about the crude variety, I don't know what God was thinking when he was handing the stuff out, but he gave it all to the world's bastards. I mean, look at this list of country ranked. This is the top 10 list of countries ranked by oil reserves. The skull and bones is my symbol for OPEC. That's not the real corporate symbol, I should let you know. But I think when the cameras are off, they put on their pirate hats and say Avast a lot in Arabic. And anyways, Russia is not a member of OPEC. They're terrifying enough. They don't have to be. They got Vladimir Putin there. If you will notice, we are the only Western liberal democracy on that list of top 10 countries ranked by reserves. And reserves are a good measure because that's where oil's coming from 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's us and a bunch of terrorists and murderers and dictators and bad people. And so I would say to Zoe, if she was here now, if I could go back in time and try and win that debate, I would say, Zoe, fine, you don't like oil sands, fine. You care about your 4 liberal values, environmental responsibility, peace, treatment of women, and treatment of workers and human rights. Fine, tell me where you want your oil from, Zoe. Because it's not enough for you to say the lithium crystals. If Americans don't fill up their cars with oil from us, they're getting it from somewhere else. And by the way, not driving, no one means it, in one of the largest countries and coldest countries in the world, but it doesn't even matter because in the year 2009, we reached a tipping point. That was the first time ever more cars were bought and sold in China than in the United States, and they all want to be 2-car families, and same with India. And so even if every single Canadian in an act of moral righteousness said, we're not going to drive anymore, fine, doesn't make a difference. China will burn all the oil they need. That's why the world's demand is increasing. These 4 values, I promise you, if you take these 4 liberal values, these are not my phrases. If Zoe was here today, there may even be a few Zoes in the crowd. If Zoe was here today, she would say, yes, that is what I stand for. Fine, Zoe. Then go around the world in these top 10 countries, and you tell me we're going to take a tour of the world, and we're going to come back to Canada, and I put it to you that using your liberal criteria, not my right-wing George Bush talk, your left-wing Greenpeace talk, I put it to you that oil sands oil is the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. Absolutely. Think globally, act locally. Okay, let's go through these very quickly. That is a picture of the oil sands, that oil sands porn. It looks like something out of, I don't know, the land of Mordor and Lord of the Rings. It looks like a moonscape. It is awfully ugly, and that is actually the chief problem with the oil sands. It is ugly, which is why it's so profitable for Greenpeace to put those in their fundraising letters. But here's a fact, only 2% of the land mass of the oil sands is the oil close enough to the top that you would mine it this way. You don't strip mine something that's a kilometer down. The oil sands are the size of Florida or the size of the UK. I mean, they're huge. And if you were to believe the oil sands activists, they would have you think that that whole thing will be dug up. Only 2% will, of course, not all at once over the course of 50 years. The other will be mined this way. This is called in situ, underground. All this area where the trees are growing and the critters are frolicking and birds are chirping, is oil sands being produced. This is the footprint here, and then the pipes go underneath it. I'll tell you how it works in a minute. Water use. Only 2% of the river flow is allotted to all 100 oil sands companies combined, and only 1% of that is used, and even that is restricted during period of low flow. And I'm just going to whip through some of the science here. I'm compressing a 3-hour speech into 40 minutes, forgive me. Here's the chart I was going to show you. This is how underground oil sands works. You have one pipe coming in, steaming it up, the other pipe pulling it out. The top is not disturbed. There are no tailings ponds, and there's no fresh water used. And why am I giving you these little factoids? Why am I showing you this? Because I don't think I can actually deprogram an Al Gore robot into all of a sudden liking the oil sands. But if I can put a few facts there showing that the oil sands are maybe not quite as horrendous as they ought to be on their first criteria, maybe I can buy enough time to talk about peace, treatment of workers, and human rights. Let me show you. Oh, by the way, if you care about tailings ponds, the phosphate tailings ponds in Florida are, I don't know, 2 or 3 times as big as the oil sands tailings ponds up here, but we won't mention that because we love our American friends. CO2. When I was a kid, this was so long ago, the first time I ever heard of carbon dioxide was when we were learning about photosynthesis. It was called plant food back then, but now it's called a pollutant. I'm not kidding. This fella here speaking, where was that? Where's Jeddah? What country's that in? Is that in Switzerland? He was speaking in Jeddah, Switzerland. I'm kidding. Jeddah's in Saudi Arabia. And he condemns the oil patch in America. He doesn't really criticize it in Saudi Arabia. He has convinced us that CO2 is a pollutant. I'm a skeptic on that. But I don't try and convince Zoe not to believe in her pagan cult that says CO2 is angry and we are inflaming the goddess Earth. I don't try and deprogram someone because it would be like someone telling me to convert from my religion. It's just not going to work. I will say, fine, I accept on your terms, Zoe, that CO2 is a pollutant. Fine, I accept that. Let me prove to you, though, that over the last 20 years, according to Environment Canada, the per barrel amount of CO2 has fallen by 29% in the oil sands. To make 1 barrel of oil in the oil sands today, we use 29% less energy, 29% less emissions than 20 years ago. I can hardly wait to see where we're going to be 5-10 years from now. So we're getting better all the time. I can assure you they don't care about these things in OPEC countries. If you don't care about people, you're probably not going to care about flora and fauna. All 100 oil sands companies combined emit about 45 megatons of CO2 a year. Mega sounds pretty big, but if you put it into comparison, a single coal-fired power plant in Asia, one plant, emits 42 megatons, and they're building 2 or 3 of these each week in China. Here's a picture of the Laseng Miao power plant in northern China. That black stuff in the air is indeed carbon. It's not CO2, it's particulate pollution. They're building 2 or 3 of these a week in China. That's real pollution in the air. According to the World Bank and the IMF, 20 out of the 30 most polluted cities are in China. We could shut down on the oil sands. By the way, the air quality in Fort McMurray is cleaner than in Toronto. We could shut down the oil sands, and I can assure you it would make not a drop of difference in the world. This is the Taichung power plant in Taiwan. 42 megatons of CO2. They're expanding it to 56 megatons. Look at that haze. It's awesome. Of course, underground coal mine fires in China emit 360 megatons of CO2 a year. So that's sort of, oops, boss, I lit the coal mine on fire. That thing's going to burn for a century. I'm just trying to put things in perspective a bit. Perspective. Those red dots are the amount of carbon emitted by U.S. coal-fired power plants. That yellow dot in Alberta is all the oil sands combined, really. I mean, or is that the blue dot? They're both little dots. I mean, if you actually cared about carbon, you would probably focus on other things, unless maybe you had a competitive or corporate or trade agenda. That's your oil sands oil per barrel. That's how much CO2 there is per barrel of oil sands oil. It is true that your Saudi Arabian, your Muammar Gaddafi special has about 6 to 10% less CO2 per barrel than oil sands oil. It's true, because they don't have to boil it out of the sand like we do. So if you don't care about blood in your oil, go ahead and buy your Saudi variety. But if you're buying from Nigeria and Iraq, know that their CO2 per barrel is about the same. And this is using the Obama administration's Argonne National Labs well-to-wheel comparison. This is not Halliburton numbers. This is Barack Obama's numbers. Because they flare so much of the natural gas that comes up with their oil. They just burn it. I mean, Nigeria burns $2 billion worth of natural gas a year. They just flare it. We catch it and sell it. Venezuela, very high carbon oil. That's the oil that would be displaced by the pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline. So we would actually be displacing higher carbon fuel from Venezuela with our lower carbon fuel from the oil sands. What's the highest carbon fuel in the world? It's from California. It's so high carbon, it's called California heavy. It's so heavy, it had to be exempted by Nancy Pelosi and Arnold Schwarzenegger in their low carbon fuel standards. So I guess if I'm arguing with Zoe, I'm going to say, look, we can't get rid of all the oil in the world, so that's just not realistic. But wouldn't you agree with me that we should take what steps we can? Shouldn't we replace as much California heavy and as much Venezuelan oil with oil sands oil, knowing that our oil is lower carbon per barrel? If you care, Zoe, you told me you cared. You told me you cared. Zoe, take your hands out of your ears and listen to me. All right, look, I'm not going to convince anyone who's been an Al Gore bot their whole life to suddenly love the oil sands, but maybe I can fight them to a draw there and say, all right, but you care about more than just green. I know that because your organization is called Greenpeace. We Canadians invented peacekeeping. We won a Nobel Prize for it. The Saudis invented 9/11. 15 out of the 19 terrorists came from that country. They're still the world's largest financiers of terrorism. Iran is using its oil money to build nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. This is Russia invading Georgia. Oil has refreshed their treasury. This is Sudan. That's a neighborhood called Darfur. 300,000 people were murdered in Darfur, according to the low estimate by the UN. If you take 300,000 people, multiply it by 185 ounces of blood per human body, divide that into the number of barrels of oil exported by Sudan over the same period of time, it's 6.5 milliliters of blood in every damn barrel exported by Sudan. That's about as much blood as would fit in a lipstick tube if you were the kind of person who would put blood in a lipstick tube. My point is, those Sudanese were so stupid. Why didn't they become birds or whales so Greenpeace would give a damn? It is true that 1,500 ducks that sat down in a tailings pond in Alberta by accident when the electronic scarecrow wasn't working. It is true. Mea maxima culpa. 1,600 birds were killed. Now, Greenpeace would use the word tragedy. I would not. I would say industrial accident. I would say PR disaster. They were prosecuted in a criminal court. I don't know, maybe you guys were in the law firm involved with that. It was a showdown, $3 million fine. I would call it a prosecutorial abuse of power and resources. But I'm not going to call it a tragedy because I need to keep the word tragedy sharp like a rarely used knife, because every once in a while there actually is a tragedy in the world. And if I call this a tragedy, what word is left when there really is a tragedy? 1,600 ducks, 300,000 people. Which one has the Greenpeace protests? Which one is in the Greenpeace fundraising letters? Those stupid Darfuris. Why couldn't they just dressed up as dolphins or something? Oh, by the way, if you care about birds, per unit of energy, windmills kill 445 times more. But that's only if you care about birds. I care about birds very deeply. I can put away about 50 chicken wings on pub night. Treatment of workers. Hey, anyone here been to Dubai? Anybody here been to Dubai ever? It's super awesome. That is a picture of the world's largest building called the Burj Khalifa. It's named after the dictator of Dubai. Of course, he's going to call it after himself. It's sort of a phallic issue there. But it is a gleaming tower. It is a gleaming tower. There are so many gleaming, pretty things, very shiny. If you like white alabaster pillars, you'll like Dubai. It's like the U.S. South before the Civil War. Lots of beautiful plantations, white pillars. Just don't look at all the brown people. For every Emirati, there are 4 foreign indentured workers, always minorities, often from the Philippines, Thailand, Bangladesh, fellow Arabs, Palestinians, who live in squalor, This is pretty, this is ugly, this is the reality. It's not just men. There are literally millions of indentured women throughout the Gulf who are, and if you think they're just economically abused, if you don't think they're physically and sexually abused, you are hiding your eyes. Who's this man? Sani Abacha, the $5 billion man. What did he do to that? Well, he stole it from Nigeria. If you work out, according to Nigeria's own commission of corruption, this is their confessions. This isn't foreign accusations. The Nigerian government itself admits to $366 billion stolen over the years by their own politicians and bureaucrats. That works out to $18 a barrel for every barrel ever exported since 1960. Price of oil hasn't even always been $18. They were stealing $18 a barrel when oil was only costing $14. That's how they treat workers there. How do we treat workers in Fort McMurray? $150,000 for a welder. The most generous, the richest city in Canada, according to the United Way, the most generous city in Canada also. Human rights. I got to speed up because I do want to leave some time for questions, and I got to go do a TV show. Human rights. This is a picture of Melissa Blake. She is the mayor of Fort McMurray, was just reelected last year. Completely unremarkable to have a young woman mayor in Alberta. I mean, Alberta was where the famous 5 were from, with the first female magistrate in the British Empire, Beverly McLaughlin, the Chief Justice. I mean, it is the most, we're the first Muslim mayor in Canada. I mean, we are a meritocracy. Question, how many young women mayors are there in Saudi Arabia? There are none. It is against the law to be a young woman mayor in Saudi Arabia. Against the law to vote if you're a young woman in Saudi Arabia. Against the law to drive. Against the law to go out without your coffin, your one-woman burial shroud on. Against the law to feel the sun on your face in Saudi Arabia if you're a woman. It is against the law to get elective surgery without the permission of your husband/owner in Saudi Arabia. It is against the law to be raped in Saudi Arabia. I did not say to rape. I said to be raped, because to be raped in Saudi Arabia is the crime of adultery, and you will get the lash for your crime of being raped. That's Saudi Arabia. And Iran, this is a picture from Amnesty International, where they actually stone women in the 21st century. Do you care about gays? Zoe does. Let me tell you that in Iran, according to the U.S. State Department, since the revolution, 4,000 to 6,000 gay men and lesbians have been executed for the crime of being gay. This is an actual photo of 2 gay men being hanged for just that. In Dubai, they're much more liberal. They just throw gays in jail and pump them through full of medicine to de-gay them. Very, 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 very liberal over there. That's an Aboriginal worker in the oil sands. The oil sands are the largest employer of Aboriginal people in Canada. They're not fake work, make work, affirmative action jobs. They need the labor. They need the labor. $100,000, $150,000 a year jobs. And that's just the direct employment. There are Aboriginal bands out there like the Fort Mackay band, 0% unemployment. It's just anyone with the companies come in and beg the kids to finish high school, and they say, you finish high school, we'll give you a 6-figure job. They probably have better high school completion rates in some of those reserves than in some parts of Toronto, I dare say. Listen, I've told you the case against the oil sands. and I've met it the best I can, but I'm going to take just a couple more minutes. How are we doing for time?
Quite fine.
We're quite fine. I don't quite believe you, but I'm going to whip through some more slides. I have 104 slides. This is a pipeline. This is a pipeline that's proposed to go from northern Alberta all the way down to Texas. This red one is there right now. It's called Keystone. The yellow dotted line is called Keystone XL. Why would you sell oil to Texas? That's sort of like selling ice to Iqaluit. Well, the reason is because that's where all the refineries are, and this pipeline would displace Hugo Chavez's conflict oil and replace it with ethical oil that also happens to have a lower carbon footprint. It'll pump $20 billion into the U.S. economy. It will be the largest property taxpayer in many of the counties through which it flows. Now, this is just us being friendly neighbors saying, hey, we got an idea. We got an idea. Here's our idea. Bunch of new jobs, bunch of money, bunch of taxes. It's just a suggestion from your friends. Or you could do what you're doing now, spending $50 billion a year securing the Persian Gulf sea lanes. This is the USS Cole that was attacked by Al-Qaeda, 17 people killed. You could spend $50 billion a year being the Brinks truck to get the Saudi oil in. You divide that into the number of barrels of oil America imports from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, etc. It works out to a $54 a barrel subsidy. So you can have your American taxpayer and your American servicemen provide blood and treasure to escort your Saudi oil in. How's that working for you, as Phil would say, Dr. Phil? Or just an idea, just an idea. Why don't you get off the OPEC oil and have a secure supply from your friends to the north who don't hang women and gays? Just an idea. There's another idea. Why don't we sell our oil to China? That way we don't have just one customer. The anti-oil sands activists, besides attacking oil sands, say we cannot have any tankers. Tankers are dangerous. There are tankers going up and down right now bringing oil from Alaska. There's tankers already exporting oil from Vancouver. Eastern Canada imports its oil by tanker. Did you know that 54% of Canadian consumption is actually imported? All that good stuff from the West, we sell it to America. You guys out here are bringing in conflict oil. This is a ship. This is one of Paul Martin's boats that leaked diesel in the St. Lawrence Seaway. That's the boom to stop the leak. This is, oh my God, we would never let boats go that closely out west, but that's the same. Look at this. Oh my God, that would be if my wife said, Ezra, can you drive for a minute? I just have to go to the bathroom. Yikes. that is an actual cargo ship wedged sideways in the St. Lawrence Seaway. That's another shot of it. Yeah, boss, you see, I just wasn't looking. And my point is, could you imagine the freak out if these boats were exporting ethical oil? But we have accidents all the time with conflict oil. This is a conflict oil tanker in Labrador run aground. Conflict oil tanker run aground in the Northern Passage. I got pictures. There's a whole website dedicated to oil tankers running aground. That's where I got these pictures from. My point is that people who say they're against oil tankers, they're not. They have no problem with us importing conflict oil in strange conditions, treacherous conditions. They only hate ethical oil going out. They're happy with unethical conflict oil, Sharia oil, gay-bashing oil coming in. What's this slide? I'm joking around. Listen, this is the most un-Canadian guy I know. He's not anti-Canadian, he's just un-Canadian. And by that I mean, he's got so much chutzpah. I don't think he could survive in this country for more than a few days. And the four values I talked about, environmental responsibility, peace, treatment of workers, and human rights, those are Canadian values. But unfortunately, there's another aspect to being Canadian, which is modesty, humility, opening the door for the other guy, being quiet, being a little bit demure, deferential. That is great in a person. It is wonderful to have, humility as a personality trait, and one day I'll know what that feels like. But for a country to be humble and un-Donald Trump-like doesn't work when your competitors are the world's butchers. We're the gentlest country in the world. That's why Greenpeace comes here to break into refineries. Try breaking into a refinery in Saudi Arabia, or Iran, or Venezuela, or Nigeria, or even post 9/11 in the United States. The reason they come here is precisely because we're so gentle. When they broke out of the Calgary Tower, the police held traffic back to protect them. That is not how it works in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to whip through a few more slides so quickly, Verity, you're not going to believe it. I set up a website called ethicaloil.org. I thought let's just perpetuate the idea, because I got to go to get a real job now at the Sun. Thanks to the Sun, by the way, for buying lunch. Appreciate it. Set up a website, blah, blah, blah. Put together some comparison ads. Yeah, there we go. This started getting, the Saudis took note of this right away. I did not know that at the time. The Saudis started to visit our website, Dictatorship versus Democracy, Sudan versus, how are gays treated in different countries. We started getting a little bit of traffic. This was until, we had 41 visits from the kingdom. We were just getting 3,000 visits a week. Okay, fine. It's not a big website. It was coming along. Daily blog entries, myths and lies exposed. PayPal, thank you very much. 1,000 likes on Facebook. It's coming along. 1,200 Twitter followers. This was, the Globe and Mail said, I like the oil diamond analogy, the conflict-free diamonds. Things were coming along fine. This is a coda to my story, by the way. Calgary Herald liked it. They put it on the front page. 208 media mentions of the ethical. Oh, great, come along. National mentioned it. 479,000 Google hits. That's pretty cool. Then we had this TV ad. Can you press play on the TV ad just for 30 seconds?
Fact. Last year, we bought over 400 million barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. We bankrolled a state that doesn't allow women to drive, doesn't allow them to leave their homes or work without their male guardian's permission, and a state where a woman's testimony only counts for a half of a man's. Why are we paying their bills and funding their oppression? Today, there's a better way. Ethical oil from Canada's oil sands. Ethical oil, a choice we have to make.
So we scraped together $2,000. That ad cost about $500. You can see a lot of stock imagery. Paid a couple $100 to do the voice. And we got the Oprah Winfrey Network to run that ad like 6 times. And, it was just to say it ran on TV, and Oprah Winfrey sort of make the point about women's rights. And we put it on YouTube, and no big whoop. Okay, fine, it was done. But then we got a call from something called Telecaster. That's the Canadian agency that approves TV ads. And they said, Ezra, we have received a threatening letter from the Saudis. I said, no, you haven't, BS. But they said, yes, they hired one of the world's largest law firms, Norton Rose, 2,600 lawyers, to threaten TV stations and the Telecaster Broadcasting Authority not to run that ad again. Our tiny little website that I thought no one was watching, the Saudis were watching indeed, and they hired the biggest gorilla in the room. We instantly tried to buy ads on every network, and CTV said yes, and then they got a letter from Norton Rose, and they wrote back and said no, and we had an instance where Saudi Arabia was bringing, not a fatwa, I won't call it a fatwa, but was fighting, was threatening, was bringing a little bit of their intolerance and their censorship from Riyadh to Canada, and shame on CTV for complying, but I knew we had struck a chord, and I thought, yes, it's exactly right. They prove my very point about them being intolerant to dissent. We love complainers so much in Canada that we take the country's biggest complainer, we give him a 6-figure job in a free house, and we call him the leader of the opposition. In Saudi Arabia, they put him in jail or kill him. Oh boy, 52,000 people went to the YouTube to check out the ad. The Saudis didn't want him to see. Thank you, King Abdullah, or whatever your name is. Ali Kanvelji, a friend of mine, debated Daryl Hannah. She's not looking too pleased with him. I think she still looks great. Oh, and a couple of you are sitting at a table sponsored by Americans for OPEC. We have a little group called Americans for OPEC, and they went down to the White House, Stop Canada, Blame Canada, sort of pointing out that if you're not bringing your oil in from Canada, you're getting it from somewhere else. Americans for OPEC, Blame Canada. What's my point? I want people to remember that it is always a choice, and the choice is not between oil sands oil and the lithium crystals. We had a little counter-protest outside Lush, a store that said, oh, the oil sands, we don't like the oil sands, we don't like oil from the oil sands. Okay, fine, Lush. Here's a couple of performance artists in the Byward Market in Ottawa handing out pictures about Lush. Lush attacks Canadian oil sands, yet does business in Saudi Arabia. What's a company that believes in women's freedom and empowerment doing business in Saudi Arabia? And how dare they take on the oil sands? They did not like this campaign. The Saudis made the front page of the National Post, editorial page of Calgary Herald. Jason Kenney went on a tear. Just lots of, even the Toronto Star wrote about it. I mean, I can't even read that. It was a funny cartoon in the National Post. Jason Kenney, we don't take kindly to foreign governments threatening. John Baird, Joe Oliver, even Paul Dewar. The NDP doesn't like the oil sands much. I think the Saudis probably should stick to regulating their own affairs. You're damn straight. Go pound sand. I love saying that. It sounds a little bit racist, but it's not. Go pound sand. I love saying that to Saudis. The new Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, just everyone's just having a... Oh boy, it was all of a sudden our 3,000 hit a week website shot up. Our number 3 source was from Saudi Arabia. They were very mad at us. I'm going to close with an idea. It's just an idea. I call it certification marks. Every piece of clothing you are wearing has a label, country of origin labeling. Made in Canada, made in China, everything in Walmart, everything in Toys R Us. But where's your oil come from? You go to the gas pump, you don't know. You just know octane. I don't even know what that means. How about if we had one pump that said made in Canada? Okay. One pump that made in Nigeria? One pump made in Saudi Arabia? By the way, it all costs the same. Which one would you choose? What would happen? I hope the government would bring in this, but even if it doesn't, I think we can go ahead with certification marks. Ethical oil. Make a statement. Ethical oil. Fill up with ethical. Next turn. We serve ethical. What do you think of that idea? What do you think of that? If it was all the same, wouldn't you choose the gas that didn't support the terror of the world, or the invasion of Georgia? Point of sale labeling, even on your receipt. You made the ethical choice. This is my next project, my friends, is to try and find an ethical oil company to put this on their gas pump and to say, hey, Canadians, if you don't like those Saudi thugs, why don't you choose the ethical choice? I'm Ezra Levant. It's called Ethical Oil. I'm having fun. Thanks for your time.
I'll pass it over to Andrea Wood.
Now we'll ask a couple of questions of Ezra from the audience. I've received a couple, but if anybody would like to ask some questions, please feel free to put up your hand and go ahead. Ezra, the first question I've been asked is, do you think your ethical oil campaign has been effective in encouraging a Buy Canada policy?
Not yet, but I do believe it's effective, and here's my proof. When the book first came out, David Suzuki felt free to dismiss it with a one-word review to the Calgary Herald. Bullshit, that's what he said. Then he took another crack at it, calling me a big-shot loyalist who was unethical, and like just a personal attack, just really un-Suzuki-ish. He let the mask drop for a minute. That was a few months ago. But just last week, he came out with his third attempt. Ezra Levant raises some very good points about the ethic, blah, 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 blah. Why would he have to come back and again? Because the idea is finding purchase. The Prime Minister himself used the phrase. I think that good faith, thoughtful progressives are troubled by some of these issues. I'm not saying they're turning into pro-oil sands activists, but all of a sudden their rage for the oil sands is dampened a little bit. It's tough to rage against the oil sands because we've got a little problem when you have massive problems in Saudi Arabia or Iran. The idea is powerful. It hasn't broken through yet, but I am quite confident that the Keystone XL pipeline will be approved, and that'll bring 700,000 barrels a day to the States. That's a big step to getting the U.S. off OPEC. Wouldn't it be amazing if America didn't buy any oil from the Persian Gulf anymore? Imagine the freedom, the political freedom that country would have.
Have you trademarked ethical oil?
You know, I sent a letter to my lawyer just last week about that very subject. I said, good Lord, we've built something here. We have, with certification marks, which is what I'm talking about more, you have to get someone to use it before you can register it. You can't just register ethical oil as a certification mark till you find a user. So I'm looking for one little gas station somewhere to let me put that little turquoise E on them, and then I'll register that certification mark. It's like a kosher certification or any other private certification. If we can't get country of origin labeling by the government, maybe we can get it just by people adopting it.
The last question that I'll ask you is, and you've addressed this to some extent, but how do you address the environmental issues regarding the oil sands development? I
say that they are definitely an issue, and an issue that the Canadian oil industry is more seized with than any other oil industry in the world. And very briefly, I will tell you my concept of an ethical oil spill. What's that? It's the same as an ethical car accident. We don't want car accidents to happen, but occasionally they do. Now, you can have an ethical car accident or an unethical car accident. An ethical car accident is less likely to happen in the first place because you've got driver training, well-marked roads, your car's maintained. God forbid when it happens, you've got speed limits, but when it happens, you stop, you report, you share information, there is charges laid, the ambulance is called. Like every step of the way you're dealing with this terrible problem ethically, as opposed to a hit and run, no cops, whatever. Can you have an ethical oil spill? Oil is going to spill. I bet you there's some oil spilled on each of your driveways. Now, what do we do when oil spills? Well, when one of the largest oil spills happened in the Gulf of Mexico 30 years ago by Petromexico, called the Ixtoc refinery, oil rig, for 9 months it leaked. But it was owned by the government of Mexico. So the government of Mexico didn't beat up the government of Mexico to pay the government of Mexico from the government. There wasn't the accountability. You didn't have when oil spills in Saudi Arabia, you don't have a free press to jump on it. You don't have an independent judiciary to sue. over it. Compare that to the BP oil spill. Lots of mistakes made. What happened? Immediate transparency, media focus, political punishments, $20 billion taken into escrow, the focus on remediation, the CEO sacked, but $100 billion wiped off as shareholder value, and I don't think BP could survive another such PR disaster. It was a terrible thing, that oil spill, but the way it was handled was by the government, by the jurisdiction, by the courts, by the convention, was ethical. We don't even know about the biggest oil spills in the world because they don't have transparency, let alone accountability. Thanks. Cheers, everybody. Thanks.
I would like to call upon Doug Pepper from McClellan and Stewart to give the formal thank you.
On behalf of Ezra and the very kind sponsors, and especially the Empire Club, I just want to thank you and everybody for a very intriguing and entertaining morning and afternoon. And thank you to Zoe as well, wherever she may be, Ezra. And I hope you got copyright permission to use her image. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, or if this is your first Empire Club lunch or what have you, it's a great institution, and as a book publisher, we've relied on it to get the words out from our authors, and I know I speak for all publishing companies in Canada that do it. So thank you especially to you. Take care.
Thank you, Doug. Ezra, as a token of our appreciation on behalf of the Empire Club, I would like to present you with a copy of Who Said That? It's a selection of quotes and notes from 100 years of Empire Club speeches.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, each one of you should have a list of upcoming events at your table. And we have an absolutely amazing lineup on October 14. Please join us for Rob Ford, Mayor of Toronto, October 26. Please join us for Ian Greenberg, President and Chief Executive Officer of Astro Media. And on November 4th, please join us for Dr. Barry McClellan, President and Chief Executive Officer of Sunnybrook Sciences Center. I would like to thank Sun News Media for sponsoring our event today, and also like to thank Bennett Jones for sponsoring our VIP reception, and MedCan for sponsoring our student table. I would like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor. We are now on Twitter and Facebook, as well as our own web address, www.empireclub.org. Thank you for all of you for coming. This meeting is now adjourned.